Hi, Maureen. You folks are upside down for some reason. Again. Maureen, I'm not sure if you can hear me. I don't see that you're on mute yet. I cannot hear anything coming from the room. Okay, now we have you.
Okay, now I'm going to talk and see if you have us.
That's good. That's good.
Okay, that should be working properly now.
Perfect, perfect.
And I'm just going to put us on. I'm going to pause the recording for a minute. There we go.
Okay, welcome everyone to the Planning and the Plan of Conservation and Development Committee meeting. My name is Joan Veely. I'll be chairing this meeting, and in the room we have Maureen Giusti, who's our chairperson, our town planner, all-around good guy. We also have Steve Biella Jr. here, Diane Dorsey, and myself. And on the line we have Sandy Popola, who should be on. Who is actually walking into the building, but she's got her iPhone so she can hear us. So we're not going to stop. It's 6:13, and this is our meeting. So we also have Francisco, who is our consultant, and Jim Mahoney online. And Francisco, I'm going to hand it over. I'm going to take the baton and give it right to you, and let's see what we have. Welcome, Sandy.
Okay. Thank you, Joan, and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us this evening. This is our 9th meeting, believe it or not, and this evening we're going to talk about town services and facilities. And so I'll go to our agenda. It's a fairly straightforward agenda, not unlike our last couple of meetings. We'll discuss services and facilities, our basic inventory, and discuss potential needs. And we'll update you on where we're at with respect to community engagement and our planned outreach efforts, which we've had some developments. So we'll update you on that. We'll also provide an update on the affordable housing plan, and spoiler alert, it was unanimously approved by council and submitted to the state. So that's a very good thing. And then we'll talk about our next steps over the upcoming summer. So with that being said, let's jump right into things. The role the POCD plays in planning for town facilities and services is really very much linked to planning for growth, in that as we think about the type of growth that Berlin can accommodate or is likely to experience over the next 10 years, we should also be thinking about the services and town facilities and their ability to accommodate that growth. And so here we're mostly concerned with and going to have a discussion about more of the public facing town services. So not the finance department and tax assessor, but the services that are really most heavily impacted or most demanded by more residents. And so very obviously that is the schools, but also other services like library, social and youth services, senior services, parks and rec, potentially DPW if you have more households, more roads, more sewer pipe, whatever it may be. Solid waste disposal and removal services, of course. Public safety, which is those needs are very much driven by population. And that includes police, fire, ambulance, animal control. The building department, more development means more work for them. Economic development, planning and zoning. You have a visiting nurse association, which, as your population changes and ages, which it is, there's potentially more demand for those services. So that's going to be the focus of our efforts. That being said, if there are other town department services that you feel need discussion or attention, let us know. And I'll just pause momentarily throughout to give you an opportunity to weigh in. And if there's something that we glossed over, we're missing, you want us to dive a little deeper on, and whether it's in discussion this evening or in our work preparing the plan, then let me know. Okay, now let's talk about the facilities that house many of those services. And the town has a number of facilities, most obviously at the Municipal Complex, which includes Town Hall, and below Town Hall or in the lower ground level of Town Hall, your police department, Board of Education, the library, lower level library, being the community center. You have fire stations, animal control facilities, a municipal garage, a DPW complex, material storage yard, and all of your parks and rec facilities, which includes school grounds, ball and athletic fields, to parks and to pools, a wider range of facilities. So that's on the town side of things. We'll talk about the schools separately. Your municipal complex, the town hall building is now, approaching 50 years old. And there have been many improvements over the years. For most of these buildings, there are regular improvements that involve the roof. The roof has to be replaced every 20 plus years, repaving done for parking lots and driveways, that sort of thing. So those are fairly regular improvements, repainting, that sort of thing. Here we're calling out some of the bigger improvements done over time, which very often involves mechanical systems, major repairs, expansions, additions, really, really big capital items that go beyond maintenance. So as discussed before, in the lower level of the town hall building, both Board of Ed and Police Department. The Police Department is planning a renovation of their space for 2024, and I believe there's $5 million in the capital budget for that renovation. The library constructed a newer building than Town Hall, constructed in 1989, yet more than 30 years old now. It's had some improvements and updates along the way. There is a roof replacement planned for 2 years from now. That space, lower level, that space is used by the community center. I think the original intention for the space was that it could be expansion space for the library, and the library is in fact at or beyond capacity with respect to its volumes, its programming needs, and could certainly make use of that lower level if the community center were not occupying it. Public safety facilities, we talked about the police department already, but you also have 4 fire stations. 3 of those are private or independent volunteer firehouses, and that's fire station 1 through 3. That includes Berlin, East Berlin, and Kensington. South Kensington is actually town owned. Many of these firehouses were built, 1973 is the newest one. That's the town owned one at South Kensington. The Berlin Volunteer Fire Department was constructed in 1946. And if you take a look at the dates of improvements or updates, they occurred in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, but nothing significant since mid-90s, which would suggest that many of those buildings may be in need of some significant upgrades in the coming years. By example, South Kensington Fire Station, the town-owned one, there is a master plan for the facility, for facility updates is being considered. So that's already in the works. It's nothing, to the best of my knowledge, that has been initiated or completed yet. But point being that I think there's an awareness that they need some significant updates. Many times this is technology, sometimes need for different space, need to house different types of equipment. Those are the types of upgrades that fire stations in particular often need. Your public safety services are comprised of, as already discussed, the fire department, 4 volunteer companies. Ambulance is contracted through Hunter's Ambulance, which is now part of Hartford Healthcare, and that contract extends through 2030. And your police department is a force of 42 authorized sworn positions, which does not necessarily imply that all of those positions are currently filled, but there are 42. All right, shifting gears a little bit, let's talk about your Department of Public Works operations. Their physical services complex is a 7.9 acre site, which sounds like a lot of acreage. However, when you're dealing with stockpiling, various materials, salt, sand, large equipment, parking, garages, sheds, and all the buildings on that site, it gets very crowded very quick. Additionally, the property, which is located in a floodplain, that also presents another issue to the property. It is located in both kind of halfway in the 100-year and halfway in the 500-year floodplain. So it does experience some inundation from time to time, and it's a vulnerable site. A 2014 facility study done identified about 1.6 million of renovations that were recommended for the property, little of which, it's my understanding, have since been conducted. So we know there are probably some outstanding needs with respect to DPW's operations on a space basis, on a age of facility and modernization basis, for flooding reasons as well. So it's something I think should be kept in mind as we continue to go through planning and start thinking about, ultimately start thinking about recommendations for facilities. The Berlin Senior Center the building was constructed in 1955 as part of the housing complex. It has had improvements in 1985, more recently in 2009. It is about 17,000 square feet, but however, the senior center operations don't have the entire space, and that space is leased from the Housing Authority for the senior center. So we know, based upon their functions and programming and what we will soon discuss, which are ideas for a new senior center, that there are some outstanding needs for more space for more modern space. And we also know from our previous discussions that, like many Connecticut communities, Berlin is an aging community with every year more seniors. So there's more demand for their services and programming. All right, Berlin schools. Well, the Board of Education is in charge of curriculum and everything involved with running the school. The facilities are actually managed by the town, which means the town is paying for renovations, maintenance, overseeing maintenance operations. So these are definitely town facilities. The high school, constructed in 1953, has had some recent upgrades. It also acts as the town's primary emergency in the hazard mitigation plan, primary emergency shelter, that is. So it's a very important facility from that perspective. It does have a generator to assist as a shelter. The middle school, a little newer, constructed in 1969, renovated as recently as, or updates as recently as 2019. That school is a secondary emergency shelter, although I do not believe it has backup generation power or not significant enough for shelter purposes. And then you have your 3 elementary schools constructed between 1955 and 1965. So you folks were busy building schools over that 10 or 15-year period, very busy. All of your schools built basically between 1953 and 1965. Griswold Elementary and Willard being roughly the same size with 400 to 500 students, and Hubbard being a lot smaller, about half the size at 213 students. All of the schools have had somewhat recent improvements. That being said, there's these are older facilities now, you know, upwards of 60 years old or so, 70 years old almost. And so there are, as you might imagine, there are some outstanding needs. So the planned improvements and projects include HVAC, which is, you know, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning improvements at all 3 elementary schools. And there's about 10 million budgeted for that between 2024 and 2025. There's boiler replacement planned for the subsequent years. And then later on, over $6 million of window replacement planned. All these windows are, for the most part, originals, meaning they're single pane, pretty inefficient. And so that's a pretty logical course of action, is to upgrade your mechanical to ensure that you have an efficient facility that's keeping that heat or air conditioning in the building. Also, this relatively recent development, I think is still taking shape, is that the Board of Education is leasing space at the YMCA building at 362 Main Street in Kensington for use by Hubbard and McGee Middle School. And Jim, I don't know if there's anything else that, or anything more you'd like to say about that.
No, I think the council approved the lease. Actually, I think what it is the lease. The town is leasing the YMCA buildings, and then the YMCA is leasing space in Hubbard and McGee for, I believe, probably, you know, after school programs, that type of thing.
Oh, I see. Okay. Okay. Let me make a note of that now. So
we'll get more details.
So the town is leasing space from the YMCA.
Right.
So it's kind of an exchange, right? Yes. Where at least some of your space, you lease some of ours.
Right.
Okay. All right.
You guys saw that 824 at the Planning and Zoning Commission a couple of months ago.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wasn't there 4 classrooms going on, maybe? Yeah. But isn't that like during the day too? It's not just.
Yeah, it's space that's not being used during the school day by the school. The YMCA has retrofitted space to be used entirely by them in both. Which one is the one in East Berlin and
That's the Hubbard.
Hubbard, and oh, it's right up there, Hubbard and in McGee. And then the Y is moving, I want to say it's called the transitional program, but I can't remember the name of the program they're calling it. And they're going to put that down on Main Street in the YMCA building. And that's a town.
Okay.
And I think it's coming out of the high school.
Okay. And I imagine we'll know as that progresses, we'll learn a little bit more about exactly what's being planned, and we can accurately document that.
I think in the town council review and possibly in the 824 review, they discussed the length of lease, etc.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. All right, Al, let's talk about school enrollment projections, because that's incredibly important to understand the demographics, to understand what sort of improvements or investments are needed in the school buildings. And to that effect, the Board of Education hired a consultant to do some enrollment projections back in 2020, at the end of 2020. So these are relatively recent numbers. They're obviously not capturing any COVID-related migration shifts, although, you know, it being done at the end of 2020, that we were into that era. So I think the researcher was mindful of the potential impacts. That being said, what the study suggests is that enrollment is going to stay remarkably stable. And if you look at the cover of the report, there's a chart on the front that's just really being used as a graphic, but the actual, what that chart represents is enrollment projections. So the light blue bars on the left were all the way up to 2020, and those are the enrollment figures for each year. So you could see it was declining. And then the dark blue charts on the right is 2021 on out, up to 2030. So you can see what it projects is enrollment stabilizing and staying relatively flat, actually bottoming out a little bit around 2025 or so, and then starting to recover a little bit, approaching 2030, but not exceeding your enrollment from 2020. So that's the most important point to make. These projections, of course, things could change. We're still not fully understanding the impacts that COVID has had and the real estate market on enrollment, and the impacts it may have over the next decade or so. But I think all the trends would suggest that these projections are probably pretty good. And the most important takeaway here is that your school buildings will most likely continue in the foreseeable future to have the capacity to meet the needs of your students, of your enrollment, which is very important because you can direct your attention to improving the quality, efficiency, and modernizing your existing facilities without having to be worried about adding classrooms, bringing in temporary classrooms, building a new school, shifting kids around from one building to another, that sort of thing. That being said, programming space needs change constantly with different programming requirements, different curriculums. And so there likely will continue to be the need to modify spaces, add different technologies, shift things around a little bit. But I think the takeaway here is that you have the schools you need. And that's really good, because schools cost about $100 million these days.
Yeah. Francisco, I have a question if I can.
Yeah, go ahead, Joan. Yep.
Looking at school enrollments, the numbers that you received from the Board of Ed, were they just for Berlin students, or were they also including the important students they get from surrounding towns and cities?
So it was total enrollment. And I would admittedly, I would have to go back to the study to peel that apart. And I'm pretty sure it's total enrollment, with the assumption being that whatever the inflow is from out of town right now remains stable. That would have been the assumption, that that doesn't increase substantially or decrease substantially. Okay. That would remain stable, consistent with larger regional population trends. So that if regionally we're staying flat, then the assumption would be you're drawing or attracting about the same number of students. But I do believe it factors in the enrollment that's coming from regionally from out of town.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, just to point out, there's the other factor too, where we export students now to charter schools. So it goes both ways.
Right, right. I'm familiar with this researcher's work, and he's a pretty good demographer. He's located at Simsbury, actually, and he does very good work. It's very thorough. So I think these are pretty solid numbers, as solid as any projection could be, at least.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thanks.
All right. So we talked a little bit about some of the maintenance and plan improvements at schools. And of course, there is the town, as I mentioned before, conducts maintenance of all town facilities, including schools. And that is conducted by the Building Facilities Division of DPW. They do the buildings. The Grounds Division handles the school grounds, athletic field, parks, that sort of thing. But the Buildings Facility Division, they have just a really wide portfolio of things that they maintain, repair, and oversee. So that includes, in total, believe it or not, 33 buildings or facilities, and fire alarms, HVAC, security, lighting, and other aspects of operation and maintenance. They also oversee the utilities supplying those buildings, which includes electricity, water, natural gas, fuel, oil, phones, field lighting, emergency generators, security systems. And they also manage and perform preventive maintenance as well as custodial services. So it's a fairly robust division of public works. There are also, and I was looking for it, had not yet found a good image to go with this, but you can use your imaginations. Imagine a handicap ramp into a building. The town is doing and continues to do ADA compliance upgrades right now. As part of the town's ADA transition plan, there are improvements that have been completed, are in progress, or are planned at Town Hall, the Library and Community Center, and the Senior Center. Those are all facilities identified in the transition plan. And the big project, the big idea that is on the horizon and in discussion, which I'm sure you're probably all fairly well familiar with, is the idea to build a new community and senior center. And the background on this is that the 2019, the town received a $750,000 grant from Connecticut to do a comprehensive study and some design plans for a new community and senior center. And so this is intended to address some of the needs we talked about earlier, that being the need to free up space at the library for the library's operations, and the need for the community center to have more robust space and be able to have more to offer. And at the same time, the need to accommodate seniors in a larger, more modern space. So the Public Building Commission, the PBC, which basically oversees the design development of new buildings for the town, selected QAM architecture to do the preliminary design. They were selected back in 2020. And so they've done some design. You could see the images on the right, both the site plan and the potential rendering of what a senior center could look like. The proposed properties across the street from the high school and on a lot that is town owned. So the town already is in possession of the property. The facility as it is currently envisioned would be 2 stories, a total of 70,000 square feet. And that is about the size of a grocery store, smaller grocery store. And it would include an aquatic center. So basically, swimming pool. As designed, to construct this building would cost between 36 and 44 million. And I'm sure, as everyone can appreciate, inflation right now is really eating into these budgets and increasing the cost of everything. The next step in this process, if it were to continue to move forward, would be for this project, given the cost and scale, would be for it to go to referendum for the town ultimately to decide whether or not this should be built.
Francisco, do you know the estimated cost of 36 to 44 million? Do you know if that was the rate when they did the original proposal or plan in 2020, or if those numbers are updated to 2022 with current inflationary costs?
I believe these numbers are about a year old now, perhaps. They are not as of today, yet at the same time, I think that range was designed to account for some escalation, hence the range.
Okay, thank you.
So, but to your point, it's the cost, the inflation with construction materials and asphalt, steel, concrete, even lumber. It's really quite incredible. It's remarkable. It's really twice as much as it was 2 years ago for many of these products. So that's something that will likely remain part of the conversation going forward.
Okay.
Right, it's a big factor in decision making right now. A very big factor.
Yeah, I would imagine that if it's going to go to referendum, they'll ask the UA&M to update the numbers before that.
Yeah.
Because I think that they probably also have to tell the people how much it's going to cost each year to maintain the facility.
That has been done to staff and maintain.
Staff maintain electricity.
Yeah, that has been done, and it is, and this is all public information.
Yeah.
It's a couple of $1 million a year.
Okay,
definitely.
Okay.
And I don't know if you know, Francisco, but there's going to be, I think there's public hearings scheduled next week on that as well. So
yeah, council, right?
I was just going to send a message to Mike and ask him Public Works to get that date. You don't know the date, Jim, do you?
He's up in May.
No, I don't.
Why would he know?
Top, no.
Yeah, but I thought it was being discussed. I just didn't retain it.
It is my understanding that council in town it was likely to conduct some hearings over the summer, perhaps to get some direction from people, get a better feel for what people think about this before bringing it to referendum. That's kind of my understanding as to the process. And ultimately to make a decision whether or not to bring it to referendum.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Shift gears a little bit, and there was like no spot in this presentation where this naturally fell into place. Your garbage, right? You put it out by the curb, and then what happens to it? It's something very important to think about because it directly impacts the community's sustainability. And Fortunately, you are a member of one of 14 communities that are a member of the Bristol Facility Policy Board, and not a member of the Regional Hartford Trash Authority, which is shutting down their trash to energy or waste to energy plant this year. It may be shut down right now for all I know. And because Hartford, my hometown, and all the member communities are really scrambling to figure out what to do with their waste, and they pretty much figured it out. It's put it on a train headed towards a coal mine in Pennsylvania that they could fill. And what that comes at a significant cost. It pretty much doubles the cost, and it's not really a sustainable practice. So fortunately, you look like as a community, you've got this kind of figured out, and you have an operating agreement in place through 2034. And so basically the way that works is that Bristol, as I mentioned, is one of 14 communities, including, or Berlin is one of 14 communities, including Bristol, Brantford, Burlington, Harlan, New Britain, Plainville, Plymouth, Prospect, Southington, Seymour, Warren, Washington, and Wolcott, that send waste to a facility in Bristol, which is actually a fairly up-to-date, modern, and efficient facility that has a lot of pollution controls in place, that separates, burns that waste, converts it to energy, and basically the town pays a tipping fee for all waste disposed of. So in terms of being able to get rid of your waste, managing solid waste, it looks like this is pretty well figured out for the foreseeable future, and this probably isn't going to be the biggest limiting factor on development. Like, that facility has capacity to take on more.
Sorry. I'm in
Okay.
trouble speaking to Mike.
All right, let's talk about parks and recreation facilities, and that, in putting together this inventory, even though I know of Berlin parks, I thought I was aware of many of them, but I was just really surprised by how many, in fact, you do have. And you really have a wealth of parks, not just parks, but open space. So we'll go through that now. And this, really should be considered, one of your greatest assets is this parks and open space system. And
Can I interrupt for 1 second?
Yeah.
So,
please do. Please do.
So I did text Director of Public Works to find out the dates, but the guest on this meeting, Susan, has provided that the community center meetings are June 2nd at 1 and 6.
Okay.
I couldn't find it on the website.
Yeah. Good.
On my phone.
All right.
So just want you to know.
So very soon we'll have a little more insight onto where that process is going. All right, yeah, so let's talk about your parks and recreation facilities. It's a wide array of facilities, including, and here are the quantities. I had back and forth with Parks and Rec Department, just taking inventory, taking stock of everything. And they include 11 playgrounds and playscapes, 19 ball courts, basketball and tennis. No pickleball, which I was surprised by, maybe in the near future, maybe. 25 athletic fields, soccer, football, lacrosse, baseball, softball, little league, and multi-use fields, which can obviously would be an example of a field that's accommodating both football, lacrosse, and soccer. Maybe it's a baseball outfield, that sort of thing. But 25 in total, and that includes facilities at schools as well. 1 track and field, and that would be at the facility at the high school. 2 swimming pools, a skate park, a couple of picnic pavilions, a community garden, as well as sledding hills, ice skating ponds, fishing ponds, boat launch. There are a lot of different facilities here. Maintenance is conducted, as I mentioned before, by Public Grounds Division of DPW, and they manage or maintain over 1,400 acres, 101 of which belong to the school system. And let's talk about the different types of parks that you have, because they're not all created equal. Some are much more active than others. And when we talk about active recreation, what we mean is a ball field, a court, a track, anything where there's really a facility, organized play and recreation. You know, a swimming pool, a playground, that sort of thing. So there's a range of parks here. I won't read the whole list, but you know, they range in size from Clark's Grove at or the Bittner Junior Memorial Outdoor Pool and Courts at around 2 acres, 2.25, 2.79, all the way to Timberlane Park, which is almost 350 acres, includes a golf course and a more passive recreation area. So it's a wide array of facilities located across the town. But if I go back, I'm going to go back to a few slides to the map. What you'll see is most of the active recreation facilities, with the exception of Timberlane Park, are located in the northeast corner of town, which is where, you know, much of your population is. And so fortunately, it's close to where much of your population is. However, what we'll see in a couple slides from now, I have another map that's going to show you where many of your passive and in conservation, passive open space and conservation areas are, because those are actually mostly on the southwest side of town. So it's kind of balanced. If you're in the northeast half of the town, you have close proximity to a lot of active recreation parks. And if you're in the southwest half of the town, you have great access to more passive open spaces. The passive parks, a number of those too, and those also range in size from a quarter. You have 3 parks that are about 1/4 of an acre: Sitco, Deming, Volunteer, and some larger parks like Paper Goods Pond Park, Pistol Creek, which are, you know, Pistol Creek is 77 acres. And so when we talk about passive recreation, we're really talking about a place where you go to walk, hike, mostly. That's the primary feature. Maybe take your dog, you know, maybe picnic, but no, generally speaking, not any ball fields or courts, that sort of thing. And we talked a little bit about school grounds. While the school grounds are, as I mentioned, Public Grounds maintains 101 acres of school grounds. A lot of the acreage is parking lots, sidewalk, entrance, driveways, courtyards, that sort of thing. The athletic component or recreation component of those school grounds, these are the numbers that we mapped those out. So the high school, about 10 acres, same with McGee. The high school, as I mentioned, across Patterson Way from the high school, the town owns 10.8 acres. That is the site of the proposed community senior center. However, that project doesn't move forward. That land is there directly across from the high school and could potentially be an asset for the high school's use. Timberlane Golf Course, 18-hole golf course, golf shop, restaurant, was constructed in 1970. $2 million of improvements in 2006. I think we all know that the golf industry as a whole has been struggling, and it's not all because Tiger Woods has had an inconsistent career in the past decade. So let's not put it entirely on him. Just, you know, trends in recreation are changing. And so, you know, this will be, I think, be over the next decade, just kind of see what the industry gives us and what golfers are demanding. with respect to thinking about the future of the golf course. But as I understand right now, it's keeping busy and is fairly well used and well appreciated. And of course, the golf course only makes up about half of that Timberlane Park site, the eastern half. So my conversation with Parks and Rec about planned projects, they have some field reconstruction they need to do, both natural surfaces and synthetic surfaces have to be upgraded, on a regular basis, 10, 15, 20 years, whatever it may be. So Percival soccer field is going to be upgraded. I believe it's going to remain lawn, but there'd be regrading, reseeding, drainage, potentially irrigation work done. Biscaglio, am I saying that correctly? Someone help me out here. Biscaglio?
That sounds good. Yep.
Okay, good. All right. BHS, I should have just said Biscaglio Field is the field that's inside of the track at the high school. That is currently lawn. It's going to be upgraded to synthetic turf with a deep grant. And then some minor items, right? And this, I'd almost put this just regular maintenance, is a new scoreboard at Scalise Field, the football field at Sage Park, new liner building at East Berlin Pool, resurfacing of tennis courts. That stuff that is happening every year, year over year. That's the regular stuff. These field reconstructions are bigger, much bigger projects. And we understand there's some outstanding need and future improvements that are planned / needed / desired. And that includes playgrounds, really playgrounds across the town that need to be at some point updated, upgraded. Playgrounds and playscapes like anything else have a life, and beyond which they become maintenance concerns. So a new playground and balanced playground at Willard School, it's something that Parks and Rec is thinking about. As I mentioned, drainage improvements, field reconstruction at Willard School soccer field. So Percival is happening in the near future. Willard would presumably be next up. A resurfacing of more basketball and tennis courts at McGee Middle School. Drainage and field improvements at McGee Middle School as well. Percival pool building will need upgrading. Little League fields at Griswold Elementary. We talked about the desire for a splash pad. Those are very, very popular, much lower maintenance and cost of operation than a pool. And that Parks and Rec would love to have one at some location in town. Little People's Playground, a little aerial image to the right. At some point that'll need to be reconstructed. And then finally, there's a trail connection that's well underway at Town Hall Percival Field with new bridge and some trail work and additional work to be done there in the future. All right, so let's shift gears and talk about more of the passive recreation, and in this case, really conservation side of things. So conservation property are properties that are held by the town, or in some cases by a private entity. These are all town-owned properties. And the primary purpose is to conserve that land for environmental purposes, ecological purposes, for historical and character purposes. And then the secondary benefit is that people have access. They can go hiking, walking, bird watching, whatever it may be. And so Berlin's really gifted with these incredible open spaces. And as I mentioned before, those are mostly on the southwest side of town, but you do have some other smaller conservation properties in the northeast part of town. And I think, as you can see, looking at the map, you really have strung together this, to use kind of a Frederick Law Olmsted, who's the father of landscape architecture, who's actually born in Hartford, and he designed Central Park. It's this jewel necklace of parks that you have here in Berlin as well, that are strung along the edge of the town, and that starting from north is Ragged Mountain Preserve. Timberlane Park, while not technically a conservation property, more of a park, as I mentioned before, it has some passive recreation areas on the west side that help connect these conservation properties. Bicentennial Park, Hatchery Brook Conservation Area, where the town's made incredible progress in piecing together properties as part of that. Blue Hills Conservation Area, and what we'll talk about in a moment are some of the trails that connect those conservation areas. And then some really important smaller conservation areas, Beckley Quarry, which has a pathway that goes down at Webster Park, Railroad Pond, Marjorie Moore Bird Sanctuary, which is it must be the smallest bird sanctuary in New England, I think, because it's about 1/4 of an acre. And I think it was basically her yard and home, right? Is that property? Is that correct?
I'm not sure what the history is on it.
Yeah, I think it was. I think that was her yard. And then also Treasure Park, which is actually just a vacant town-owned park. I think it used to be more of an active use park, but it's a vacant parcel that right now is just kind of in conservation, if anything. Webster Park, I should notice, it is not currently accessible. There's no parking or road to get into it, but it is a forested, untouched area of over 50 acres. All right, and some of the recent progress mentioned, as I talked about it at Hatchery Brook, the Tchaikovsky properties contribute to that, and they were acquired by the town, and as Jim was involved in much of this work. There's been parking added to improve access to those properties with some open space signage improvements and improvements at the community garden. And as I mentioned before, trail facilities, and we're still working on updating the trail mapping. I have like 3 different versions. I think you can see another one over here that is somewhat, I'll bring it to the front, somewhat more up-to-date and accurate, but also less legible. So we're gonna sharpen the pencil on these for the plan. But what I want to impress upon you is the fact that you've got these incredible trails that connect these open spaces across town. And this is really something to be very proud of, and should likely be something that is an area of focus within the POCD, because you have the New England National Scenic Trail, which is a very big deal. It spans across New England. It goes right through your town, and that takes a couple of routes. They're both are Blue Blaze trails, and Blue Blaze trails are Connecticut statewide trails. And on both the Metacomet Trail, which is a regional trail, and the Mattabasset Trail, also a regional trail. And then you have these smaller local trails within your open space and conservation areas. Everything from Beckley Quarry to Ragged Mountain have their own trail systems. So when we take a look at the existing trails and then think about additional connections regionally, a connection north to New Britain and to the CT Fast Track pathway is a real exciting possibility. Because the CT Fastback pathway goes from New Britain, extends into Newington. And we are, FHI Studio is actually a member of a planning team for the I-84, I-91 project, which is called the Greater Hartford Mobility Study. And we're also taking a look at regional trail connections that could be implemented as part of a highway project, with the idea that we would connect the entire region. So the extent to which Berlin can connect up to New Britain and Newington means that you're all the better connected to the entire region. And so we're talking about a network that is useful to, for recreation, and for some people, we're actually just getting from point A to point B. The town is also working on some really strategic and important links in the network, and on a trail connection that would connect Timberlane Park and Ragged Mountain. Right now, the route goes through Southington on property that is not publicly owned. And so this would secure that connection. So there's a lot in the works here, a lot that's been accomplished over the past couple of decades. And I think something we should probably dive a little, if you would agree, dive a little deeper into in the POCD. All right, and a little more detail on those trails by virtue of the fact that they're going through open space areas that have streams and brooks and rivers. They have bridges. So they're recently the Metacomic Loop Trail, there segments of that have been completed. The Metacomic Trail has been relocated at the Meriden line. The Bicentennial Trails were extended. There's been various bridges built, and Eagle Scout built a bridge as part of the project. Repaving of some trails so that they're accessible. And improvements at Bicentennial and Hatchery Brook. And then a lot of collaboration. Connecticut Forest and Park Association, that's the CFPA, assisted the town on many of the trail improvements. Collaboration with Central Connecticut on student-built bridges at Sage Park and Timberland Park, and other bridge improvements, including the picture I showed you, or the picture that's at the right. That is a new bridge and path connecting Town Hall to Percival Field. And in addition to town parks and conservation properties, of course, you have state parks. Lamentation Mountain State Park, 47 acres, located almost entirely in Berlin, just spilling over right on the edge or in the corner of the town, bumping up against Meriden. Silver Lake as well. It's actually not technically a state park, it's a state property, but a state-owned property with boat launches and shore and that sort of thing. And so these are also pretty incredible local assets. Okay, that concludes the inventory of what you have now. And we talked a little bit about needs across the system. I talked about some of the needs for buildings and the wish list that Parks has, and the desire to provide more trail improvements. I'd love to get your feedback now before I wrap up with our next steps and outreach and all that, on what you think the needs are from your perspective, or what the priorities should be for stewardship of the town's facilities, buildings, parks, schools, services. Are there services that need to be expanded, improved? I open it up to you on all ears, as they say.
Okay, thank you. Folks, do you have any questions at this point or any ideas?
I mean, I think if we were to prioritize things, me personally would rather see some of the upgrades to, say, the facilities and the fields and stuff at the schools before we start looking at, and I don't know how the budgeting works, I don't know if it can be done at once, before we start looking at, making the trail connections to Newington and Britain and stuff. I think I would rather see that happen first. Yeah. But again, I don't know how that works in the plan or the budgeting or whatnot, but I think that should be more the priority. Yeah.
So could you, I didn't catch the beginning of that. Could you repeat that back?
Sure. If we were looking at prioritizing some of these projects, I would look at maybe upgrading and doing the improvements to the fields and the playgrounds, et cetera, that we have already at the schools, et cetera, before we start looking at, you know, working on connecting some of the trails. Okay. Again, I'm not sure how the funding or the budgeting works for that, if they're connected or not connected, but that's how I would like to see the priority. I think let's fix up what we have before we start going on some of these things. Yeah.
You know, I think you raise a very important point about budget, and not sure how that plays out, because you may be able to do both, in that many times the funding for trail improvements comes from a state grant or DEEP grant or DOT grant. So it may be possible that some of these projects could be grant funded, and that you pursue expansion of your trail system on that basis by being very proactive in applying for writing grants. And you know, even if there's a 20% match, if you could leverage 80% state money, then that's a pretty solid investment. And at the same time, you know, reinvesting in your parks and athletic fields.
We also get have the fund that, and Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm still learning all the budgeting stuff, but the fee in lieu of open space, and we have an open space account, and that money is dedicated to open space uses by statute. So it can't be used for improvements to, say, a facility. It has to be used towards something to achieve goals for conservation or open space. Right. It may be a fixing a trail that we already have or something like that, but it can also be used for acquiring additional open space. It can be used for improving trails. We've recently used some of it to fix bridges that we have on existing trails.
Okay, so it can be used for maintenance. Okay.
I just have a thought that I want to share also, that just based on my observation, because I don't often or rarely ever get an opportunity to use any of these facilities that we're talking about. But it bothers me when we've got all of these trails and nothing is done to mitigate the impact that people have on these various, you know, all over town. There are different areas that are quite popular, and the sides of the road are all beat up because cars are pulling off the road, and parking, you know, there's trash there. There's no consideration or provision for parking or places for trash. And of course, that would require somebody from the town to then maintain or manage in some manner or fashion. But people don't care. They drive all over lawns. They drive, they think nothing of blocking roadways. I know firsthand, we have lots of issues with people trespassing from a particular group that parks all along the roadways near where I live so that they can have their hiking and stuff. And we've had frequent conflict with these people because they just kind of come in and take over the neighborhood. They just assume. And, you know, it's wonderful to have all these trails, but they have negative impacts on the immediate area that needs to be considered.
So let me ask you this. What do you think the solution is? Is it that there's more like official trailhead parking that needs to be built, or there needs to be more enforcement of, you know, like no parking and cars ticketed that are illegally parked at trail access points? What do you think the solution should be?
Yeah, probably a little of both.
Yeah.
In our area, we've had no parking signs put up that have just gotten ripped down. And so once they're ripped down, it's kind of unenforceable. The best that we've been able to get done is have a car ticketed that was blocking a stop sign.
Yeah.
But you know, then the other 100 cars that are parked in the roadway are, you know, there's nothing that really can be done. So I think the parking lot is, or providing parking, really needs to be part of offering this type of recreation.
I would just comment briefly that, you know, I think starting in 2003, the town, I think really in the plan then concentrated on parking for existing and new, you know, town open space areas. And we've made a lot of improvements for parking. Obviously, you still have conflicts with neighborhoods, notably, you know, the situation at Bicentennial. I think what Diane's talking about is more the trails that go through other areas, particularly in that case, it's Meriden Water Department land and Meriden Park land. And, you know, those areas are lacking in parking, and you know, those are not the areas where we control, you know, own and control the open space. There's still areas that we can improve parking, certainly, that we own, like Beckley Quarry, for example, you know, but we've made a lot of parking improvements, including, you know, of course, now we're going to have additional parking at Ragged, which is also needed. And, you know, not to say that we shouldn't do more, but I think a lot of these problems are in the areas that we don't own. And I don't know, you know, how we can, you know, we can think about how we might be able to address that.
Well, Jim, I have a thought on that, you know, maybe you and I can talk about another time, but
sure.
The town of Berlin agreed or came to an agreement with the city of Meriden to close the roadway. And if the closure of the roadway was reconfigured, there could be parking.
On the Meriden side.
Well, you know, up in the area where people want to start their hiking and get the traffic out of the neighborhood, but you know, that would require some negotiation with Meriden.
I think one of the key things we have to look at, and when we're talking about parking, it's not just parking, it's adequate parking for one. And I think that's something that before we look maybe to add any new trails or any new access points, that's something that needs to be figured out ahead of time. You don't want to disrupt a neighborhood or current community and say, oh, by the way, now we have a trail that starts at the end of your street, and you know, now all of a sudden their whole street is, you know, is full of cars or parking. So I think, you know, I think before we do something like that, you need the neighborhood or the community involvement as well.
Yeah, you don't want to move the problem, you want to resolve it.
Right, right.
Yeah.
One of the things I'd add just to that is, because at Conservation Commission, they do a lot of discussing about the parking and the entrances to the trails, is at what points are there trails that would be attractive to the neighboring neighborhoods, so that people can actually walk to get into the trail from the neighborhood too. So there are those spots as well. There aren't as many of those, certainly not in your neighborhood, or, you know, but there are other neighborhoods that have that connectivity to some of the trails. So, so they are talking about some designating some of those entrances so people can find them. But again, this is a balancing act to that. Is okay, but if you build it, they will come, right?
Yeah.
So they might come from other places. I don't know if you guys could hear that all because I turned around.
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah, we got
Forgetting
it.
I can't turn around.
Yeah, I heard. I at least heard it, Maureen. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, so I think we're aware of, you know, some of the pluses and minuses of trails. So we'll make sure we explore that issue. But we talked about a lot more, of course, the schools, town hall, library, senior center, other facilities, town services, and anything else that where you see some outstanding need or real potential?
I think myself, looking at the town services, because we have, as you said, admittedly that there's a growing senior population, we don't see them going away soon. We see them actually growing in numbers. So, which automatically says to me that we have to gear ourselves, I think, to protect the seniors. I know that a lot of the projects we have are rentals, and so you'll have people moving out and transitioning through Berlin. And that still brings police and public safety to the forefront. And also with the senior population, you have to think about the accessibility of healthcare. I realize that we have, you know, hospitals one way or the other way or into Hartford, but you know, even if we had some sort of medical facility or somehow a development, such as something like in Hartford, I mean, not Hartford, but like Farmington has a bunch of complexes that they do like orthopedic surgeries and stuff right on site. So, I mean, I thought about that in that line, not that that's a big selling point for the town, but I mean, it kind of just brings attention to it. The other thing too is we talked about the library and we talked about the town hall and needing possibly roofing, and that would be something that would probably be coming down the pike. And I'm hoping that when we do go to refurbish these projects, if we decide to refurbish as opposed to rebuild, that we start looking outside the box and start looking at ways to prolong the longevity of roofing. I mean, I know that a lot of people now are going the way of metal roofing. And I know it's a more costly item, but the lifespan is like 50 plus years on a metal roof. There were originally some problems with reception with cellular phones and stuff, but that's all, and even noise when it rains, but that's all been diminished with the different products that they have out. Now they've introduced different colors. So it's going to be replacing those asphalt shingles. And that's probably a good thing in the sense that, you know, had we known, we probably should have put one on the high school, because now we don't want to think that 20 years from now, we're going to have to redo that whole roof. But so I'm hoping that there's cost savings ideas that are out there that will be utilized and that we're not trapped into doing stuff just because, you know, it's a state project or whatever, we have to do it this way. I'm hoping that by the time we move toward it, that the atmosphere will change and people will be a little bit more open to finding new and better ways to do things, bring better products to site.
Okay.
All right. My last question is this about the library. I've been to the library. I will admit the last visit was before COVID, but there were a lot of empty shelves there. So when the library talks about needing more space, I'm a little confused as to why. It seems that there's less and less books there. And I'm wondering what their need is.
Yeah, it's my understanding that's being driven mostly by programming needs. You know, libraries are increasingly becoming, in a way, community centers that are providing a lot of programming as a means of staying relevant to the community.
Programming like in classes?
Yeah, classes, different events, space for different uses.
All right.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I was just confused by that. But like I said, I went to the back of the library. It was just all empty shelves. And I was like, what the hell happened to all the books? And then I realized that people put them on discs and stuff or digital. Whatever, digital. Yeah. But but still, something like a good book.
Yeah.
Anyway,
maybe that's something we need to dive a little more into.
Commissioner Rogan, just
Yes.
a thought on the library needs of programs. If a lot of it's going to be like classes and stuff. I mean, we do have the building over at Pistol Creek that we've been looking with something to do. I don't think there's any reason that we've been wanting to get that kind of thing kind of updated a bit. You know, they could be utilizing that space other than the current space in the library to do their programs or their classes.
Yeah. Or better yet, Brian, that should become a venue. That should become an active venue that could be rented by the citizens here in town for different events that they have.
Well, I agree with you, but there's nothing saying that, you know, when if it's all done by rental and scheduling, you know, the library could say, hey, you know, Wednesdays from 5 to 6, let's claim that rental spot.
Yeah, let's do a ballroom dancing. Okay.
You know.
So was that the golf clubhouse? Is that it, that building?
Yeah.
Okay. And it's been mothballed?
Pretty much. I mean, I heard the kitchen was kind of shut down, but I like Joan said, we could turn that back into something for the citizens just by updating the kitchen and putting Wi-Fi in it.
Yeah, that would be excellent. Go ahead, Maury.
Parks and Recreation uses, I believe they use the building or not. I don't want to guarantee that for going inside for summer Parks and Rec programs, but Social Services is under Parks and Rec and they utilize it as well. I don't know all the ways it's used, but I know there's a lot of investigation into that, the uses that are the potential, and they've been using it more than they had been. I just don't know what they are.
Okay.
So,
all right.
Clubhouse, bar, restaurant.
Yeah, one of the uses is for storage of furniture, because the town's responsible for taking, you know, if people get evicted, the town has to take the possessions and store it someplace. So in the basement, we've been using that space.
Question. I also heard we had the third level of the high school, which is pretty much completely unused. Could that be a potential spot for doing some programs and classes, you know, after hours, maybe, that the library could also utilize?
Yeah, I would think so. Why not? It's a town property. Anyway, you've got a lot of good ideas, Francisco.
Okay. Anything else?
We had our coffee. Wait.
No, I just have two thoughts to offer after, in addition to what Joan just shared, and that is for the roofing projects, the solar shingles that are available now. There's so many different solar options available that might be worthy of consideration for future improvements.
Absolutely.
We have such expansive rooftops. And the other thought is with respect to public safety, that the 4 fire departments are wholly volunteer departments. And if we don't continue to have enough volunteers to man the departments, we're going to find ourselves having to pay for those services. So
thank you for bringing that up. That's a very real concern for many smaller towns in Connecticut, is the difficulty in attracting younger and newer volunteers, and the potential need to go to you know, a paid professional department, and the concerns about the cost associated with that's a very legitimate concern.
I think the town does a great job of keeping up on the equipment.
Yeah,
I know the fire trucks.
yeah, we're always buying them new fire trucks.
I think the buildings definitely need some updates and upgrades. I mean, I think that's a priority as well.
And you know, the last thing I'll say is that when it comes to parks and recs, I really would hope that department would start to focus on creating venues for the townspeople. You know, I've been able to go down toward Westbrook during the summer, and they actually have a little town green, which could be, you know, like our Veterans Park. And they're always having outside concerts for free. On Friday nights, they have a band come in, and you bring your chair, your picnic basket, and your cocktails or your sodas, and you sit and listen to music for 2 hours, and then everyone goes home. But it gives you a chance to actually be with your neighbors or to be with your friends. And they run it through the summer, and it's every Friday night. And then the other thing is, this is something I saw over in Europe years ago, and it's always impressed me. When we were kids, we were able to go ice skating during the winter. And because it was a little bit colder, and mom and dad just put the skates on you and get the hell out of the house. You went until it got cold and dark, and that's the way it was. But they don't have that anymore. And I mean, a lot of times, we just don't have the really brutal cold snaps that will freeze it up. But what they do in Europe is they actually have, after I think the end of October, they send their Parks and Rec crew out, and they actually build, it's maybe about, it might actually be 2 feet. There's a frame that they put down, and there's a plastic, and they flood it with some water. But they add a chemical to the water, and it'll freeze the water within like 30 minutes, and it keeps it frozen all that winter. So no matter if it gets to be 50 degrees, this pond, small little pond, and everybody comes out with their ice skates, and everyone goes skating. The parents are out there, the kids are out there, everyone's flopping around, they're having a good time. And they light up a Christmas tree near it, and that's what they do, and they take it down sometime in March or April.
So there are a number of communities in Connecticut that do similar.
They do? Well, that's another idea for us too.
Both those I think is actually a number of communities.
Yeah. I mean, just
go ahead, Brian. Were you trying to get in there?
Yeah, no, just talking about community events, and on that topic, one thing that I was actually talking about with some old timers here in Berlin that people remember is there used to be car shows up on like the turnpike and racing and stuff like that. And I was talking to a few people.
Happens all the time, Brian.
Well, on time to the chief
on the turnpike.
Yeah, well, I more the train of thought was, maybe make it a town sponsored thing where on a Friday night, a couple times a year, you shut down Farmington Avenue from Stop and Shop to Burnham Street intersection, and you allow for some legal, drag racing, and all the businesses could be open and serving their pizza and ice cream, and everybody could have their hot rods down at Stop and Shop in the parking lot.
Yeah, baby.
Everybody bring their kids down and watch the races. I think, with how big of a hit that the Derby was at the Berlin Fair, that I think that there's a lot of, people in Berlin that would enjoy doing that as a family community thing.
Only if I get to wear my poodle skirt. Yahoo!
Okay, so I'm very desire for these culture. I think everyone's suffering from 2 years of COVID and just not being out there in the world, connected to people with events, right?
Yeah, we don't know how to behave anymore.
Yeah, well, exactly. Everyone's just wishing there was more happening that they could experience, enjoy, and be connected to. Okay, all right.
All right, thank you.
Sure, thank you. All right, I've got some direction. Anyone else, anything else?
No, we're good.
Okay, well, let's talk about our next steps. Because it's really time for us, and maybe even past due time for us, to get a larger audience engaged in this discussion. And so we have an online survey that is ready for launch. So we just needed to get that press release for it out, which we've got a draft press release, and I think we're in the process of making sure everyone signs off on that, who needs to sign off on it. But the biggest thing here is that we've committed to a date for a public workshop, and that would be Thursday, June 9th That's our big event. We're inviting whoever wants to come to have a discussion for a couple hours, like very, very much like many of the discussions that we've had over the past several months. In addition to that public workshop, we are also planning, and we talked about these a little bit before, but planning our thematic meetings. And those are like mini workshops focused on one or two topics. And those will be June 22nd, 23rd. We'll do back-to-back meetings each evening at like 5 and 7. I think we're 5:15, 6:40, 7 o'clock, I think was our schedule. And we're going to group those into, right now, the plan is we covered transportation, infrastructure, and facilities in one discussion, housing and neighborhood in another, economic development, commercial areas in another, and then open space, farms, historic and environmental resources in another discussion. And basically we would invite key stakeholders to each of those discussions. Those would also be open to the public if the public wants to attend, with the idea that we'd maybe get a group of, up to 20 or so people in the room at a time, but prepared to handle more or less if needed, and be able to focus really on a couple of key subjects to have a discussion around. And so
can we?
Yeah, go ahead.
While we're discussing that, because I just know what everyone's thinking. So just to clarify that these meetings are going to have substantially the information you guys have been hearing all along, and designed, or the idea that the interested committee members should go to the meetings that they may be interested in, with a little feedback to give us that you'll be there, so that they're not actually a quorum of the committee wouldn't be at any of them, and that they're the stakeholders that we're hearing from, and the public that we're hearing from, as to how they are feeling about these themes. You'll recall when we set up the Plan of Conservation and Development Subcommittee, that some of the commissions throughout the town were like, "Whoa, we've always had somebody on the committee," and we said that they'd be targeted and invited to some of these thematic meetings in the community meeting, so that their input would be focused on there as well. And just so that you're not all going, "Oh no, 3 meetings in June, and how are we going to manage that?" Just so everyone knows, it's kind of this more fluid than that for this. And I'm sure Francisco is more articulate with regard to how to explain how the meetings will run, because he explains it to people all the time. But that I wanted to make sure you guys understood the expectation from the beginning, instead of thinking, "Oh no, 4 meetings, 3 meetings."
Do you have a time and location for the one?
Yeah, thanks for Maureen for that reminder. These are really designed to engage people that have not yet been engaged in the process, and there's not going to be any new information that you have not seen. So if there's one meeting that was really meaningful to you that you would like to be at, then let Maureen know, so that we don't end up with quorum at a particular meeting. But yeah, these are designed to gauge other committee, commission members, council members, other interested parties across town, and give them an opportunity to participate in the same kind of way that you've been participating over the past several months.
All right, so really the participation in June is not really required for us. It's just only if we feel that we want to be there to witness or take in some of the testimony.
We're engaged too.
Yeah. All right.
And
that makes it a little bit better. I'm trying to figure out my calendar here, going, "Oh my God."
Yeah, no, you don't need to worry about it. This is all about bringing people into the process that have not yet been involved.
Okay.
And to let you know, not just your participation is not being discouraged either.
No.
It's just
no.
not, we would like to avoid having to notice it as a meeting of this committee, for quorum purposes, and instead have them as public meetings.
Yeah,
however, not mandatory. And just to answer Sandy's question, so the public workshop is scheduled for June 9th at the community center. And I'm trying to blank on the time. The community center down
6 o'clock.
6 o'clock.
Let me go to the next slide, because we've developed.
Oh, there you go.
Wonderful flyer.
There you go.
That will very soon be distributed, and so this flyer tell people what time, where. It has a link to the survey. We also want them to participate in the survey, and so we're advertising quite a bit here.
Because I know I have the redistricting thing to the library. I can't remember if it's 5 to 6 or 6 to 7. So, but I don't have to go to the library. Oh, I'm almost wrong. Unless you want to go. Okay.
We'll go get you upstairs if we need you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's fine.
She's on the campus.
Yeah, she's on the campus. Well, that would be good. I'm really happy that you are going to be reaching out to the other commissions to get their input, and it'll be interesting to see how they react to some of the ideas that we have, and hopefully they'll be able to sharpen those ideas and even improve on them.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Great. Thank you.
Just to let you know also that, the Economic Development Commission expressed interest in getting it indeed. So I'm going to do an abbreviated version of the economic development presentation that you heard at the EDC meeting in June. So get them into the loop.
Good. Excellent. Thank you, Jim.
You're welcome.
All right. So much of our work over the next month or so is going to be focused on preparing for these events and conducting these events. And then coming out of these meetings, much of our work is going to involve organizing all of that information to try to capture what the main themes are, and to be able to share that with you, and to communicate it in the plan as well. So there's a decent amount of work to do after these as well, to make sense of everything that we've heard. So stay tuned. We're as we kind of sharpen the pencil on these thematic meetings, we're actually going to get these scheduled for exact slots, and probably develop a similar flyer for the thematic meetings as well. Okay.
So
that would be good.
And I'll just jump on that one, that the thematic meetings will be downstairs in the Board of Education's conference room. I think we had a couple of planning and zoning commission meetings down there, probably. And like Francesco said earlier, 5:15, 6:45. Yeah. 5:15 and 6:45 is most likely the time.
Or it's 5:15 and 7. The idea is we'd have an hour-and-a-half meeting and a 15-minute break in between the two, so people could come in, go out and come in. And and that we get it done in a reasonable time frame. The idea of 5:15 is give people a chance to get there after work. And starting the 7 o'clock meeting, you guys start a lot of your meetings at 7, so people probably feel comfortable with the 7 o'clock start, but we wouldn't want to start much later than that. So that's how we came up with those time slots.
It seems like a small space.
Well, the thematic meetings, we are thinking that we target for 12 to 20, right? 12 yep. Invited, figure an additional up to 20, might more, right? you know, more might show up that goes to 20 and we think the room can handle 30. It wouldn't be set up the way it's set up.
No.
Now it would be spread out as like stations. So Fran did put a call in, and so we haven't posted it as that yet. We did have a message to the Board of Ed to make sure that it could hold that many. I don't know if I got an answer to that yet.
How are you identifying who gets invited?
We're working on it. Let's see what maybe Francesco and Jim have a little bit more of an answer. I think what we're going to find is, for instance, for the economic development one, that perhaps there'll be a member or two from the Economic Development Commission that's going to say, yeah, now we're going to go to the meeting, or I want to go, or they weren't at the economic development meeting. And the same, you know, starting with each of the commissions for those particular themes, the public buildings, Parks and Rec, Conservation Historic District, starting with the commissions and identify people that we might have hear from regularly, or their staff liaison may hear from regularly.
You have people that you think would be interested in any of those particular meetings, you know, let Maureen know so we can get them on the list.
Please share. You know townspeople better than we do.
Okay, any other questions about the outreach that's planned? Okay, as I mentioned earlier, the affordable housing plan was approved, which is a very good thing, fully supported. No opposition from the public. It is a very important milestone for the town to have an official plan. While town's made incredible progress towards affordable housing over the past couple of decades, this is the first comprehensive plan that documents you know, everything that's being done and what needs to be done, and it establishes a commitment to increasing affordable housing. This plan will inform our work on the POCD. There'll be recommendations from this that we'll plant right into the POCD, and you know, one of the most obvious recommendations or strategies that we'll have within the POCD would be to basically, you know, fully engage in the policies and recommendations of the affordable housing plan. That being said, as we go through the process of developing the POCD and focusing more on housing, you know, there may be some ideas that come out of the POCD process that can inform the affordable housing plan. So we can always revisit the affordable housing plan with some minor additions or revisions to reflect new ideas and new information that comes out of the POCD process. So the two really work in tandem. But it was really good to get this done, and well in advance. Well, I think a couple of weeks is well in advance of the state's June 1st deadline. You're doing much better than many communities. So
Okay, good.
It's a very good thing. All right, so our schedule, you know, here we are, believe it or not, we're like approaching 2/3 of the way into this process. With our work looking into town facilities and services, we've really, for the most part, have rounded off the existing conditions assessment, so that we're done with that for the most part. I mean, there's still some outlying information there that we need to pull in, and some things that continue to move that we need to track. But a good part of that effort is done. The AHP, Affordable Housing Plan, is adopted. And so now we can really shift our focus and attention towards community engagement and starting to develop the actual document, the plan itself. And that includes developing a format, you know, a style for it that you feel, you know, effectively communicates the ideas. And so we'll give you some options on that when we come back to you. And then really starting to populate that with a lot of the information that we've collected to date. And our goal remains to have the plan adopted by the end of the year. And we successfully went through a similar process recently with the AHP. So I trust we can have similar success in finalizing and adopting the plan by the end of this year. And then the other element that's out there, and we've been busy with all this other work, is that we've been scoped to assist the town in updating, revising the Berlin Turnpike zoning as needed. And that as well, as we get further into the process of developing the plan, we'll have a better idea of maybe what sort of revisions to that zoning district may be needed. And we can work with the town to develop those. And that's a little less urgent than getting the POCD adopted. It may be that we want to get the POCD adopted first and then focus on the zoning work. So that remains in the future. Now your next meeting, and Jim, yeah, did you want to get a word in there?
I was just going to say that the affordable housing plan has a number of zoning type of recommendations or studies. So that's something that Maureen and I are talking to town manager about at this point. We'll loop back to the Planning and Zoning Commission and this committee, but we're kind of thinking from an efficiency point of view that it might be wise to try to take, look at all those things as one package rather than one off at a time. And so maybe when we get to the point of the BTD analysis, we'll want to, consider some of these other things. So we have to flesh out the details of how we might do that, but that's kind of a thought.
Thank you. All right. Our next meeting, surprise, surprise. We have decided, because you've been so good all school year, we've decided to give you the summer off. Right. And that is because, as I mentioned, it's going to take us about a month to process all the information we'll be receiving from the survey and all the outreach. And really to start to pull all of the information we've collected to date, the mapping, the data, the charts, the graphs, the writing, into a format for the document. It's going to take us a little while to get all that together to be able to present to you. So we need the time. As your planning team, myself, my team at FHI Studio, Jim and Maureen are going to stay at it all summer, but we're going to come back to you in September with some work to show to you, and that we will definitely need your direction on. So your reward is you get the summer off, but when we get back in September, we've got some real work to do in September, October, and to a lesser extent in November as well, but especially in September and October.
And to make September a little more palatable, I believe you only have one Planning and Zoning Commission meeting currently scheduled for September, because the day you would normally meet is the Berlin Fair. Yeah. The 15th would be the Berlin Fair weekend. You chosen to not have a meeting that night. So September, a lot of the commissions take August off. This commission lightens the load in September. So we'll add the POCD. Okay. Okay.
So the 15th there is no. Yeah, I did delete that. Yeah, we're also. We have the one on. It's the first, right? The first. Okay. Thank you.
And it may be that over the course of the summer, we have information, work product to share with you, and which we can email out to you and you know, get your feedback and comments on. So we could you know, keep communicating. We're not going to totally shut things down, but you know, we could take a couple of meetings off here over the summer and still make some pretty good progress.
If you have any inspirations too, that you're writing down by your bedstand, you know, just shoot us an email too. You know, don't want to lose them. Don't want to lose those.
No, just send them. Absolutely. We're always happy to receive input, because it really makes my job that much easier to have some guidance, direction from you. There's just less that I have to read into it. And if you have ideas, you can point us in the right direction. It's very helpful to the process.
Yay.
All right, well, that concludes our meeting for this evening. I'll turn it back over to Joan.
All right, thank you, Francesco. All right, so any last minute comments, or do you have a motion to adjourn that?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
All right, Diane has the motion, and the second is by Sandy. And just for the record, it is 7:56. 7:56 p.m. And all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. That's your eye.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Good night.
Good night, and have a good summer.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. You'll be hearing from us.
All right.
Get off the boat. Good deal. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Francesco. Talk to you.
All right.
I'm sure very soon.
Yeah. Oh yeah. We've got work to do.